Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast, and this is for the Lombardia preview. The headline numbers, 253 Ks finishing in Como, leaving from Bergamo, 4,800 metres of elevation, 200 more than last year, 1,000 nearly more than the route in 2020. But Benji's got more of the details of this course.
In 2020, we had a parcours also from Bergamo to Como. In 2021, we changed from Como to Bergamo. And that's last year, we had a much more mountainous parcours. But this year, we returned to that 2020 parcours, a parcours that had the Madonna del Ghisallo with about, 50 kilometers to go. Muro di Sormano climb just after that. The technical descent that had Nibali going full on, and Remco ended up over that ravine and so forth. That all happened in the 2020 edition. And then it was kind of a tune-up towards the next climb, Civilio, which was in the last 10 kilometers, which is 4 kilometers, 10%. And then we had San Fermo di Battaglia. Now, the 2022 parcours is slightly different. They took out the sketchy descent that Remco crashed on. Going over it, the first half is just more hilly than the 2020 version. And when it comes to the second half, indeed, Madonna del Ghisallo is still there with about 50, 60 kilometers to go. And then it's a good 20, 25 kilometers until we start San Fermo di Battaglia, the climb that is normally the last climb in this race, before we go to Civilio, which is at 4 kilometer at 10%. And then we go back to San Fermo di Battaglia. That's a smaller climb before we go to the line. So from the second that we hit the first of these San Fermo di Battaglias, it's up and down until the finish line. I think that's a fair assumption. Based on these changes, the first thing that comes to mind for me is the action is most likely going to wait until Civilio, right?
Yes, in theory it would, right? But then if you have Roglic, yeah, maybe. But then I look at the team construction, and you look at Pogacar, who won Trevale Vaticine in a sprint last night, beating Valverde and Higuita fairly comfortably. He lit it up early out of the corner. He won the Montreal sprint easily. That had the same sort of accumulated climbing. This is a lot of climbing up and down with, as Benji said, little flat in the last 35 kilometers, and even after the Ghisallo descent, you can stay away there. If this was a Grand Tour Stage 20, Benji, what would we be saying? We'd be saying get riders up the road early. It's the perfect parcours for it. You have valleys where teammates can help. And I think with the way UAE tried to control Giro dell'Emilia, which has shorter climbs than this, the San Luca climb, I would try and put UAE under pressure and make them make difficult decisions, because the very, very obvious result of this race is Pogacar in a small group of 3 or 4 descent, and Pogacar wins the sprint, because Valverde, tactics-wise, good luck when he's a director. He still doesn't know when to launch his sprint, and he doesn't have the sprint to sort of cover up for those tactical mistakes anymore. And I look at the teams like Movistar, for example. Aaron Baru could go early with Jorgensen. They have Mas, who Mas is not going to, maybe he'll prove me wrong, distance anyone, I don't think, on San Fermo. The climb is not that hard. 2.8K is 6.7%, but the Civilio, I would launch Mas there. But then for Jumbo-Visma with Vingegaard, who his flat sprint against Pogacar is not as good. Bowman, Foss, Hessink, I just think teams need to be much more open and aggressive. I doubt they will, to answer you. So that's a very long way of saying, yeah, probably the action will be Civilio, but I don't think it should be if I was, one of these other teams.
Looking at the favorites, Pogacar is indeed the one for me as well, just like you mentioned. His preparation was second at Emilia after Mas. Mas dropped him on that climb in Emilia, San Luca climb, 1.8 kilometers at 9.4%. They did it 5 times, and he put Pogacar under pressure. Mas put Pogacar under pressure already on the second last one, and he cracked him on the final one. Now, 1.8 kilometers at 9.4% is half of what the Civilio is. Civilio is 4 kilometers at 10%. So that's a harder climb. If Mas can make the difference on a Civilio, which based on Emilia he can, then can he hold it in the technical descent that comes afterwards? Because that descent of the Civilio is essential. We've seen Nibali destroy that descent in the year he won. One of the best descents I've ever seen him alive in cycling. You got to look it up if you haven't seen it. Amazing descent. And I feel like when it comes to Mas descending, it hasn't been amazing this year. It's gotten better, though, compared to the Tour de France and stuff, where it was actually terrible. But is it on the level where he can sustain a, let's say he gets a 15-second gap at the top of Civilio? Can he sustain that on Pogacar in the descent?
No, because Pogacar's much heavier. His recovery on these false flat sections or the lower slopes of San Fermo, I think it's going to be really tough for Mas. I mean, it's another thing to follow someone on a descent. It's another thing to maintain a gap when you're setting your own lines. So he was okay, still nearly crashed following Pogacar and Emilia. They got caught, though, very easily by other guys who were way behind them. And the question is, should Pogacar go on Civilio, Benji? Because his descending also, to be honest, it's not the best in the world. Is that the best way for him to win this race, putting pressure on the Civilio, or is it up to other people? Like, who can beat him in a sprint that's here? It's probably Igita's the main one I'm looking at. How will he go at the back end of a longer race? Will it actually be a group of 8 or 10 guys on the Civilio, and it'll be Nibali attacking on the descent with some other riders like Mikel Landa? Landa's a top-tier descender. I don't think Moritz can survive that long. Vingegaard's a better technical descender than Pogacar or Mas. I know it's Crow race, and they barely did any long climbs, so it's like impossible to know Vingegaard's true condition for a monument, but I have a hard time seeing him being dropped on the Civilio. He's not won one-day races like this before, but he's a different rider now from 18 months ago, obviously after the Tour. His descending's good. Can he beat a Mas in a sprint? Yes, he can. So I don't know. I've kind of argued against myself with what I thought would happen. But yeah, there's so many teams who don't have a chance head-to-head against Pog, who I think you should be trying to put UAE under pressure earlier. I'm looking at you, Bahrain, DSM, Trek Segafredo, who have a former winner in Bauke Mollema, Arkea with Barguil. There was another rider I wanted to mention who's gone out of my mind. Vlasov was who that was. What do you think Bora do, Benji? Strong team on paper. Grosschartner's fine. Agita good at Trevale Veracine. Hindley, we're back in Italy. Longer climbs. Vlasov podium this race before in 2020. I know it was different. Are they the team you think should be adopting my strategy? Because head-to-head on the Civilio, if they just wait till the Civilio, don't they 90% of them all just get dropped and then one hangs on, best case?
Well, we don't know what Shackman's form is like. We don't have a run into this race from him. We don't have a preparation for him, so we don't really know what he's like. So it's difficult to judge what he can do. But I think on the Civilio itself, he should drop. Like, on paper, he can't follow the pace of a Pogacar and a Vingegaard on the Civilio, and it's pretty long enough to drop a Max Schachmann. When it comes to Vlasov, I was low-key disappointed in him when it comes to Emilia. He made the group into Trevali, but he ended up not being able to sprint at the end, which I was also expecting him to be able to do. He was second last in that group, and usually his kick this year was pretty on point. So I don't know, slightly disappointed in that aspect. Higuita was the one, like you mentioned, where he's the one that can compete with a Pogacar in a group sprint, but I would still not put him on the same level. So if I'm them, I try to figure out a way to get ahead of that and adapt a strategy that indeed can put UAE under pressure beforehand and perhaps try and make it a sprint between Ayuso and Higuita in a group ahead or something. Like, create a situation like that where Pog is in the group behind and they send Ayuso to follow an attack of Higuita or something. But those are like very specific things that you need to pull off as an opposing team that is difficult to make happen. And next to that, does the parkour even allow that? Because on one end, yes, the Civilio is a climb that on paper is the one where you're thinking, okay, this is where it's going to happen. Is the San Fermo di Battaglia beforehand good enough to send a rider that is not the best climber up the road? Or will UAE already be pacing like they did in all the Italian classics so far? Will UAE already make sure that it all sticks together until that Civilio so that they can launch Pogacar or keep it together for Pogacar like they did at Trevali, for example? Like, I see UAE just neutralizing it from that second last San Fermo before Civilio until the top of Civilio and try and do stuff with Pogacar at that point. Can these other teams do it earlier on Madonna del Ghisallo? And that's just too early, and the climb is not great, in my opinion, to attack from that early on. Or do you expect early attacks on Madonna del Ghisallo that might pressure UAE into pacing their domestiques before we get to San Fermo? That's early, right?
I mean, their team is so strong. Ayuso, Formula, Almeida, Hirschi, Maika, Ulisi. Like, we'd be expecting Hirschi, say nothing happens on Ghisallo. Like, who's going to pace on
Yeah.
that climb? Who's going to... I think it would have to be a Bahrain or Ineos. Before I get to Ineos, though, I will mention our show partner Zwift. The Zwift Hub has launched and immediately popular the new affordably priced indoor trainer from Zwift, who are breaking down the barriers to indoor training, making the trainer cheaper and easier to set up than any other on the market in this price range. It's sold out in Europe for the time being. If you're in the UK or America, I think you still might have a chance. No promises, though, once this is posted. But make sure you go to Zwift or follow them on Instagram to stay tuned with updates on the trainer or indeed the Zwift platform. And if you want a free trial for 7 days, you can head to Zwift.com through the link down below. Ineos is another one of these teams where actually, Danny Martinez is one guy who sneaky could beat Pog in a sprint. He won a sprint in the Basque Country this year, like a legit sprint against Alaphilippe, Ulisi, Roglic, and Bilbao. But his form has been kind of up. Oh, Bilbao's not doing this race either.
Yeah.
What the hell? What the fuck? Sorry, I know I'm zigzagging. But I'll get to Bahrain in a second. Sorry. Ineos have got cards to play. Yates, Gegenhardt, Martinez, even Rivera looked okay at Crow Race. It says Rodriguez and Sivakov are doing it. They're a team where I think you got to send Gegenhardt or someone on Ghisallo. Like, if you just help UAE control the race at that point, like and I think San Fermo's the one before Civilio, I think that's too late. What gap are they going to get? Like 10 seconds, he or she will go to the front, or Ulisi or Formula or Almeida. They'll hold the gap at 10 seconds and that'll evaporate on Civilio. So, or do you just trust Adam Yates? Can Adam Yates straight up drop Pog with Mas, with Vingegaard on Civilio? Are we overrating Pog's climbing? We haven't seen him do a climb like this since the Tour, right?
Well, the disappointing part for me when it comes to Yates is that he was just not there at Emilia. Like, if we look at the likes of Montreal, he was the strongest climber in the race, Yates. He was about to drop Pogacar if the climb was like 2 kilometers longer or a kilometer longer. Pogacar was struggling in the wheel of Yates there. And when we look at this parkour on paper, that climb is now longer, but I also have the feeling that Pogacar is gradually growing in terms of strength in these last 2 weeks in similar form that he did last year, for example. 2 weeks before in Trevale, I'm pretty sure he was not at his best because he was nowhere when the Marquis won that race. And then eventually he moved towards Lombardia and was the strongest in the race. And now we see this year that his preparation was not perfect either, but does that say that Pogacar is therefore also weaker at Lombardia? I don't know. He can be back at level by the time we reach Lombardia this weekend. And with that in mind, I'm not necessarily expecting Adam Yates to straight up drop Pogacar on Civilio, but I might end up being wrong. Also because I think UAE is going to have enough riders at the foot of Civilio that it's not a one-to-one battle from the start. So by the time it's a one-to-one battle, I think we're halfway to climb. Then he needs to hold on for 2 kilometers. And that goes for a lot of riders, though.